So this is the second part of Aisha's self-introduction from point 4.
So that then brings me to my fourth component, which is increasing our students' vocabulary development. In increasing our students' vocabulary development, what I mean is that they're going to be exposed to some words that are not necessarily a part of our Canadian English vocabulary. For example, we're going to be looking at Shakespeare. That's very old, early modern English from our Renaissance period. So that's 1600s, late 1500s, early 1600s. So there'll be some words that are in the Shakespearean poetry and the play excerpts that nobody really uses today. So students will be exposed to these words and see how these different words such as thou are used and what they necessarily mean. We'll also be looking at a British author. His name is Neil Gaiman. He's a modern day fantasy author, and because he's from England, he uses a lot of different words than what we necessarily would use over here in Canada. So for example, instead of saying pants, because in the UK, pants does mean something else, he uses words like breeches and trousers. So students are going to be exposed to a lot of different terms, not necessarily only terms that are not a part of our English vocabulary in Canada, but also terms that that'll be new to them, especially for their grade level. So that then brings me to our novels and texts of study for this course. So because our course is for a 4-week duration, we have 4 novels / a genre we're going to focus on, a novel a week. So our first week is going to be D'Aulaire's Book of Greek Myths, and that is by Ingrid and Edgar Perrin d'Aulaire. Our second week is going to be The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. The third week, Coraline by Neil Gaiman. And our last week, we're going to be focusing on poetry. So we're going to look at the poetry for young people. Our main authors of focus will be William Shakespeare, Lewis Carroll, Emily Dickinson, and Robert Frost. And because all these authors are from various different time periods, the students are going to be exposed to various elements of poetry and get to see how poetry has developed over a course of time. Lastly, I'm going to talk about our weekly structure for the course. So every week, our course is going to follow this standard structure. So to begin our class and our week, each student will be asked to conduct a write-up explaining what they think a text will be about. So they will be provided with an image, a picture, and then an excerpt from images within the text, as well as the title, and then they're going to come up with an idea of what they believe the story will be about based off of these elements. Then I will always introduce the students to some biographical information, so they will have some information on the time period itself, as well as the author. In knowing what's going on during that time period, it will help the students further understand why the author is incorporating various elements into the text, as well as why the author may write a certain way. And then we will always have an introduction, of themes and definitions of concepts. For example, themes that we might find in many of our texts are family, fear, identity. We'll also have concepts like what is fantasy, what is a portal fantasy, what is dark fantasy. Students are then going to be given daily reading and exercises for homework. So every novel, every text will be split up into chunks per day. So they'll have their reading, they'll have questions, but they'll also have analysis questions for homework. That way, when they come to class, they'll have some notes and writing prepared to engage in a group discussion. Then we'll also have our activity time during class, so we're not just going to focus in on the homework throughout the duration of class. The students will also be asked to do activities in class. The activity portion is where the students will have their writing done and conducted. And then for our very last class, so this would typically be a Friday, students will have a film adaptation or an adaptation of some sort to look at. So for most of the text for this course, there is a film adaptation that can be watched alongside with it. And in watching the film adaptation, what we're going to do is we're going to analyze what they have chosen to keep in the adaptation, what have they chosen to change, and we're going to talk about why they may have changed it and how this impacts the story in itself. Looking at adaptation is actually something that a lot of students in English literature do in university. So by starting them off now, they're getting a little bit of a head start on focusing in on these things and these very particular details that, while they might not seem like a big deal at the time they're watching the film, when they compare that to the text that they've read, it really does alter the story and it alters what they take away from the tale. And then lastly, as with any class, they're going to either have a final assignment or a test for the novel/text. So some examples for a test we would be for our Greek mythology. Since they'll be learning a bunch of different writing styles and myths, they'll have a test on the conventions of that time. They'll also have an activity, for example, where they'll get to write their own story following our hero's journey, which is an aspect of our Greek mythology course that they're going to be focusing in on.